welcome back to another episode of Marketing Girly by Sky Society. Today I am chatting with Beatriz Lopez. She is the marketing director at Boston Red Sox. Welcome, Beatriz.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So excited to have you on the podcast and excited to jump into your journey. You were able to break into sports marketing without having sports marketing experience. And so I'm excited to jump into your career journey and how you got to your current role. But before we get started, can you tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I have been working at the Red Sox for this is gonna be my seventh season.
Oh my
But I've only
gosh.
been here for about like 6.5 years. We count by the season. So technically I started in the 2019 season. Um, but yeah, so I've been here for 6.5-ish years and I was our first digital marketing hire. So I kind of came in to no like structure, no processes in place. And I was able to really create my own niche here at the Red Sox and really take hold of all of our digital marketing. Um, and then a couple years into my career here, I found a spot that I was really passionate about, which was multicultural marketing. And I noticed no one was really like doing that. So I kind of raised my hand and started working on some things. And now I'm able to lead that area of our marketing as well. But yeah, like you mentioned, I did not come from a sports background. So it's been, it was a huge learning curve when I came in, but I can say like I think I finally found like where I was meant to thrive. And I really love working in the sports industry, so it's been a really fun journey.
That's amazing. Can you maybe, this might be, I'm not sure if this will be a hard question, but can you describe what it feels like to figure out where you're, like you mentioned, like, oh, I found where I'm finally supposed to be. I think a lot of us are really searching for that feeling of wanting to find a job where it feels like it fits. So I don't know if you
Yeah.
can maybe share some of the qualities or like feelings that you have in your job that kind of make you know, like, oh yeah, this job, this role really fits me.
Yeah, and I will be honest, like I like it is a feeling about like the work that you're doing versus like the actual like role or like even like the place sometimes, but it's really about the work. And I just feel like there are things that I was doing prior that were definitely just like tasks. It just felt like I was completing tasks and there was no like emotional connection to it. But now, even like the smaller things, I feel like an emotional connection to it. Some of my favorite projects, I'm like beyond like happy to be a part of, and I just feel like very grateful and fortunate to like have been able to like be a part of something that is my work. So I think it's more of the feelings around like the things that I'm doing, even if it's like a small thing, doesn't feel like a task anymore. It feels like it has purpose. It feels like I'm meant to be doing that. And I feel very connected to like the things that I'm doing here in this position.
I love that answer. I always love to tell girls because I feel like when you're new to working, you feel like you have to get a dream job title at a dream company to kind of have that fit, right? If I work in this industry, if I have this job title, if I work at this company, but it's not that at all. I always love the saying circumstance is more important than subject matter.
Yeah.
If it's the circumstances around your job, it's the, yeah, like that feeling like you're contributing to a greater purpose. It's not just a task. So yeah, I love that perspective of yeah, it's not just the job and the title, it's all of the other things that really make you love your role.
Yeah, and I'm very fortunate also to work for a company and an organization that I think is like very aspirational for a lot of people out there. So I do say that with that in
Yes,
mind
yes,
that I know,
yeah.
but at the same time, like, I think there are people like it almost the energy like feeds off of others too, because there are other people who work here who like just feel the exact same way. And I think when you are working with like-minded people, that in the sense of there's a purpose behind our work. So even like the tiniest thing, like something as small as being able outside of my role, like being able to like coordinate like tickets for a group or we've had to like bring in guests for interviews, and just like meeting them and walking them over to their interviews, like something as simple as that. I know like what it kind of involves and like what it could lead to and like how much it means to other people. And I think a lot of that goes into it as well. So like yes, I work for the Red Sox, which is awesome, but I think like people once you find like that kind of feeling at a job where you feel like you connect to the purpose, and you can see the big picture in like the tiny details. Like I think that's like the key to being like really happy and feeling like very fulfilled in what you're doing.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a super important message. And yeah, going on with like, yeah, being very grateful for getting to work in an
Yeah.
organization like Boston Red Sox and understanding the weight and that carries and that you're right. It is very aspirational to work in the sports industry and to work for that company, but that's not the only thing that makes
Yeah.
the role great. It has to have those other pieces too, or else it's not going to give you that same fulfillment.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly.
All right, so I want to jump in, like really dive deep into what your role is and dive into multicultural marketing. But before, we're going to rewind the clock just a little because I want to talk about your transition into sports. So the previous role, or actually, yeah, you had a previous role before that at Redgate where you were there for about 3 years. So do you want to kind of maybe share this like early part in your career? We can start there or before you kind of decided that you wanted to go into sports marketing.
Yeah, so I worked for another awesome company, Redgate. They're based out of Boston, and they are like a smaller team, but they have huge projects in the city, like some of the bigger commercial real estate projects in the city. They work with like some of the bigger like names in Boston, like Harvard, like it's huge. So I also felt very lucky to work there as well because I was working on some really cool projects. And it's funny, I also came into Redgate being their first marketing hire
No
because they were
way.
kind of starting up, yeah, they were starting up their business. Like a couple years before I joined. So they didn't really like need a marketing hire. They were outsourcing it until they decided they wanted to bring it in-house. So there I was able to kind of like create my own little like process and structure and like build the marketing department. And you know, it's I that was like I was like a year and a half out of college at that point. So it felt kind of a lot to be in charge of the marketing department, but it was also a little freeing that I can do things my own way. And a lot of my colleagues were much older than me. Like I was the youngest person in the office. So I did have to learn a little bit more about, you know, speaking up for myself and like if I had a decision, kind of explaining why and like feeling a little bit more confident in like who I was and what my role was there. Um, so I think that I learned a lot about that at that organization. I also learned that, you know, sometimes it's okay to like step outside of the box and like look at areas where you can add value. And one of the things that, you know, a couple years into that job, I realized was, you know, they had these development projects in these outer areas of Boston where the communities were, you know, like, you know, more multicultural. And I thought I would be a really good asset in the sense that I had a passion for you know, communicating with people of different backgrounds. That's what my college degree is in, anthropology, communications, and global studies. And then the other area I thought I could be an asset in was the fact that I was younger and they were targeting, you know, like a younger demographic for these residential buildings. So I kind of raised my hand and I was like, hey, can I help with the marketing, building out the marketing plans and promotion plans for these buildings? Typically we outsource, but I was brought in as like an internal representative to help really like create these programs, build the websites, like our target audiences, everything from like logo creation to like the art that went on the wall in these buildings. I was able to like have a part in those decisions, which was really, really cool for someone my
Yeah,
age at
oh my
that point.
gosh.
Yeah. And then in that role, I realized I loved digital marketing. I learned more about, you know, I stayed more focused on like target audiences, like how do you communicate to a certain group of people, building out like paid media plans and just more of that. So I asked if they would pay for a boot camp for me to go and learn more about digital marketing, get my certification. So I did that for a couple months. And then I really took over like our digital marketing and introduced, things to the corporate side that we weren't doing from a digital marketing standpoint to get business. So in that, I was there for about 6 months after the course. And I was actually posting a lot about like what I was working on LinkedIn. And I got a LinkedIn message from a recruiter here at the Red Sox that they were hiring for this role.
Oh my God.
I thought it was spam. I was like, this is not real. Like, I'm not responding. But then I did, and I kept getting responses, and I was like, oh my God, this is like legit. So, I went through the application process and the interview process. And I mean, obviously, I don't have a sports background, so like, I was already like, there's no way I'm getting hired for this. But what I just could lean on was the fact that like I had built so much at this company and like really knew like digital marketing, like was living it and breathing it and knew that they were looking for their first hire. So I kind of used the fact that like I had been a first hire, I had built processes, I had built structure, and like I know digital marketing and I can bring that to you. So I really just leaned on my skills
Yeah.
versus like my industry knowledge or like my background. I mean, I did do research on like who was on the team that year and things like that and like other campaigns that they had run. And I wasn't afraid to also like point out areas where they could see improvement if they did certain things. So I remember one of my best interviews was with their analytics team where we like got into the nitty-gritty of like digital marketing and targeted audiences and segmenting lists and all these things. And it just felt like more of a working session than an interview. And I just made it through the process. I did learn, they were thinking of hiring someone else, but kind of took a chance on me. So I've always thought about that. Like,
Oh,
if
it
that
gave me
didn't happen,
chills.
like I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
So
Oh
that's
my
kind of
goodness.
how I broke into sports. Not your typical journey, but there are some lessons that I learned from that process.
Yes. Okay. I want to dive a little bit more into that interview process of you doing
Mhm.
your transferable skills, but I want to rewind a little bit because you touched on so many amazing things you did at Redgate as well.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you were the first person on the marketing team. So I have also had women that have done our boot camp and that have gone in and been like, oh, I'm the first
Mhm.
person on the marketing team. This is so scary. Like, there's
It
no
is.
one to
Yeah.
teach me. There's no one to be the mentor. I mean, there can be mentors, but they're not in marketing, and so you're having to figure it out all on your own. So what advice would you give to somebody who is also that first hire that is new, right? You don't have a lot of experience. I don't think you are building a marketing team, but you have like your position probably at Boston Red Sox that was different, you being the first hire because you had all of these years of experience under your belt. But for someone who doesn't have a lot of experience, they are the first hire. What advice would you want to share with them?
Yeah, I would say first, like, don't be afraid to ask questions or admit that you don't know something. I think that's where people fall into like this bad, like, trap where they can't get out of, where like they won't admit that they don't know something and they need like answers. Like, it's okay to, especially if they know they're hiring their first marketing hire and they know they're hiring someone who just recently graduated college. I don't think like expectations are that you are this like massive expert who's going to know everything and not need help. Like, I think that's part of the package, that there will be like a learning curve, there will be a training portion and answers, you're going to need answers. So I think that's the first thing. I know sometimes it can feel like a little like you're showing weakness and like if you ask a question or if you just admit like, hey, I don't know how to do this, like can you help me? Or like, hey, I don't know how to do this right now. I'm gonna go do some research and figure it out and then I'll come back with like a plan. I think sometimes it's also like you feel the pressure to be like, yes, I can do that right away. It's okay to kind of give yourself a little bit of grace in those instances.
Yeah.
Um,
I
yeah,
think
and
also I think asking questions too is also such a sign of intelligence. I always say that of like you don't want to be the person that just assumes that they know everything and
yeah.
then go do it all wrong. It's
Mhm.
so much better to ask questions and it does not at all like mean any less of you. And I think
Of
that's
course
like
not.
such
Yeah.
a misconception you have when you're young is like you feel like you should know everything, but that's not at all the expectation. And asking questions is just such a great sign of intelligence, of curiosity, and
Yep.
it's to be something that you should be, yeah, not afraid to do or not think that it's going to make your team look down on you.
Yeah, and that's what I say to like anyone on my team. Like I love when they ask follow-up questions. It makes me feel like, okay, you were engaged, you were listening, your brain was like things were churning in there and you were like wanting to know more or like really wanting to get clarity versus just like running with it and not really like understanding. Like I would rather the questions and have that conversation than, you doing something because you think you have to, even without all the tools, and then maybe having to do it again. So yeah, definitely asking questions and then being super like adaptable and flexible is so important. I think again, it comes a little bit from like the necessity, like you kind of have to be flexible if you haven't been there for a while, you don't know what, their way of working is, or you might come in with an idea and really be passionate about it and kind of be shut down. Like, that's okay. Like, find ways to like work around it or like adapt your idea to like what their needs are versus just kind of like thinking you have to be like your plan and like you're coming in and that's what it has to be. It's like things are going to change, and that's okay. At my first job, it was a little bit easier to do that because our projects were more long term. Like there was no like quick like deadlines. I did also help with like their pitch like proposals for projects. So those had a deadline, but I had a little bit more time to like adapt things. So I feel like I kind of like learned that skill there. And then when I was looking for something more fast paced, like here it's like day to day. Like things change like in minutes and you just have to find a way to like work with it. You can't just be like so stuck in like what you think should happen. You have to be open to new ideas, open to changing things up. And I think that's a really big like strength in working with like in a fast-paced environment, but also even just having that no matter what industry you're in.
I love that. And then how about for that like first year or two on the job when you were like newer out of college, you didn't know a lot. How were you teaching yourself? Like were there any resources you were going to? You didn't have anyone coming to teach you, so how are you learning how to do all of these marketing tasks?
So they did connect me with their like external marketing person who had been helping them for a while. So I was able to speak to her and kind of pick her brain and understand, okay, like this is what they've been doing to date. But I really tried to the way I think about things is like, okay, understanding like the goals, understanding how things are functioning right now, and is there a better way or like a more streamlined way or more efficient way to do it? And the internet was like my best friend. Like I was constantly Googling, like, this was before ChatGPT, before AI. I was just like Googling, like, platforms that I thought would be better for us to like, house our marketing tactics or like efforts in. So, should we look into Hootsuite or should we look into some of these different platforms that they had never looked into? So it was a lot of research on that, finding solutions. Was huge. And then again, it's just like asking questions and like YouTube, like I would YouTube a lot of things, or I would also look for inspiration in like what other companies had done. So I would look for like those maybe top like five companies that were comparable to the company I was working with in that I was like, okay, these guys are doing it right. Like, or like their work is aspirational to me. Like, how are they doing that? Like, so I think like finding inspiration in other areas is totally fine, like not copying ideas, but like just try to see like what someone's process was when they like created something or like this seemed to be really successful, why? And trying to like use that. And then like I joined a lot of marketing like networks. So I would go to, there was one for marketing professionals in real estate. So I went to that one and was able to speak to a lot of people who were in my position and pick their brains and try to understand like how they did their job and how they grew. And I actually gained a mentor from that, and she was like really great. And then just went to a lot of other like networking events, to just industry, like general industry events, to just like see who the top players were and like kind of research them and things like that. So it's a lot of extra work, but I think it pays off. Again, it makes you feel a little more integrated with like what you're doing. It's not just like a job. You start to like live and breathe it and really like care about it. So I don't know if I answered your
No,
question
that's
fully, but
so great. I just wanted to say too, what's so inspiring about your journey, because you have this incredible job now, but it's so clear how hard you worked to get to where you are now. It didn't just fall into your lap. Like you worked so hard at this position. It would be really easy for somebody to just show up 9 to 5 and then leave, but you are joining networking groups, you're learning, you're like really, really investing in yourself. And I always say like the best job you can get early on in your career is the one where you're going to learn the most, right? It's better
yeah.
to learn more than to have the like fancy job title, to prioritize learning as much as you can, especially when you're starting your career. But it's so clear that your mindset was just really focused on growing and learning as much as you can. And also too, just to normalize, like it's totally okay to be Googling things when you're on the job. Like we
Yeah.
probably still do it now. Like it's totally fine to understand that you don't know everything, and to just like have that continuous pursuit of learning, I think is going to help you grow so far. So I love hearing that was just like your approach is like, I'm just going to learn as much as I can. I'm going to talk to everybody I possibly can. I'm going to network as much as I can, instead of just, yeah, just showing up and just doing the 9 to 5.
Yeah, and I'm a huge advocate for like learning. Like I went back to school like I don't even know, like a couple of years ago to like get my MBA because being here at the Red Sox and leading our digital marketing and being more like aligned, like in tuned with like I work so closely with our sales department, and I just really wanted to understand like the business more, and also like are there things that I can bring of value having this business knowledge to like our digital marketing. So I like, and I will probably take another course at some point and do something else because there's so much like there's always something new out there. There's always more that I can learn. You can always get better. So I think like learning is like the number one thing you should be doing to, helping yourself develop and getting further along in your career. Any way that you can learn is great.
Yeah, yeah, and I also think those are, in my experience, the best type of people are the ones that always have that mindset, no matter how far they get in life, of that there's always more to learn, and that there's never like a point where you're like, I know everything, because I think that's the
Yeah.
point where you stop
No
growing, or
one knows everything.
yeah, no one knows everything. Yes, and they're lying to you if they
Yeah,
say that they do.
exactly. Yeah.
So the other thing that really caught my attention in this early part of your stories, you mentioned that you were posting on LinkedIn a lot, and that's how you got noticed. So
Yes.
can you share like what types of things you were posting on LinkedIn?
Yeah, so I think I've definitely like gotten worse at it the busier I get. But I think it's which is something that I learned in business school as well as like any other like leadership program I've been a part of is you have to be your biggest fan. Like you have to be proud of the work that you're doing even if it feels small. Like you should be sharing that. So the same way we use like Instagram to share photos of like a vacation, you should also be sharing the stuff that you do every single day and you're pouring so much of yourself into is like taking the time to just like post about it. And it doesn't have to be this long thing. It can just be like, I'm really excited to share like the success of this project, or like we were able to like accomplish this, or talk up your colleagues who helped you do it as well. And so I think at Redgate, I will say like I shared that I feel like a lot of purpose here and I finally feel like I'm somewhere where I'm thriving. A lot of that has to do with like this job is very fast paced. I love like the industry. I love like the projects I get to work on. However, I was also feeling a lot of like purpose in the work I was doing at Redgate and a lot of pride in the things we were able to accomplish. It's just a lot of it's so slow. Like building from like idea to like actually opening is like years. So I just couldn't picture myself doing that forever. But I was really proud of like projects that I started and then was able to see like this building open with like the logo I helped like design and pick and like the color scheme that like we picked and like see my advertising out there and like you get our leasing numbers and see that people were actually like gonna live here. So I think a lot of um the stuff that I was sharing was more about like the company's accomplishments and as someone in marketing, like you should be able to do that. A lot of it is like sharing accomplishments, like project updates. So I was kind of just doing a lot of that, as well as like a couple of like personal tidbits here and there if I worked on a project and even if I had like a small part in it, like I would share my part, but also give kudos to like everyone who worked on it, just to be like very proud of what I was a part of. I think sometimes people feel like, oh, I can't post this because like it wasn't mine or like I wasn't a, but you can share your part and then just like, congratulate everyone who worked on it. And I think things like getting into the rhythm of doing that is so important. So I think I was one, had my skills in LinkedIn, but also was able to kind of showcase like the things I was working on, that maybe helped me get noticed for this role.
Yeah, and I think that's such a also kind of low-hanging fruit of what to post about because I think sometimes when I encourage girls to post on LinkedIn, they're
Mm.
like, "Well, what am I supposed to post? Like what can I possibly post on LinkedIn?" Like everything seems really scary and intimidating, but I think like if you work at a company and your company is accomplishing things, just posting about those accomplishments, shouting out your team, sharing like the thing that you did to contribute to it is such a great piece of content to share. And like you said, it allowed you to get noticed by an incredible company and got you and contributed to you getting an opportunity. So like you can't expect anybody to notice you if you're not doing anything on LinkedIn.
Yeah. And as someone who like hires and right now like we're currently like in the middle or like towards the end of like a search, I will say like the moment we get an application and we have the LinkedIn link, that's one of the first things I click on. I check out the person's LinkedIn. Like yes, I look at your resume, but I feel like your LinkedIn is also like a live resume. So I love to see people who are active on there and try to get a little more context about like who they are and like what they've done, because I feel like LinkedIn is just allows for that, where a resume is just like very static document. So I always like go on someone's LinkedIn to see like what they're posting and what they like or things they share, just to get a little bit more of a picture of like who they are, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. Are there any things like if you were any common mistakes you see on someone's LinkedIn profile or any recommendations someone can like maybe do right now to improve their LinkedIn profile?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, the like headline, obviously like what you're kind of your not your title because you might not be in a position at that point, but you should have something that kind of represents you but is not like too wordy, like very simple. And then really it's the experience portion. Like I've seen people who on their resume, like I mean it's the same mistake with resumes that I've seen too, where it's like you don't really like you share I worked here, I worked here, I worked here, but I want to see like what you did there. You like so just adding like your contributions or like accomplishments, like seeing more of that on your LinkedIn profile is like really important. I think again, like seeing someone who's a little more engaged with like the industry, is really nice. So people who are like liking articles that maybe have something to do with the not necessarily the industry that they're applying for. So it doesn't have to be like sports related in my case, but it can be something about like digital marketing or like so knowing that you like are following trends and like you're very interested in this shows that, or you're sharing things like, hey, I read this like, very interesting thing and I just wanted to share it with my network and like kind of adding your 2 cents, or again like posting things that you've done. I think that's like such an easy way to make yourself stand out because it shows you're dedicated and like you really are like invested in this space versus like, oh, I just kind of marketing is cool and I want to work in marketing. Like I think it's that like extra step really like shows, I don't know, an investment that people who are hiring really want to see. And there's so much activity on LinkedIn. Like it's almost like impossible not to find something that resonates with you or like catches your attention. So I think just you don't have to be like super active on LinkedIn. Like I get it, like things happen. I am like way less active than I was like in years past. But if you're like on the search for a job and like you just graduated college, like you should, that's a place where you can really like network, like put yourself out there and like make sure you stand out because like that's your goal at the moment is like, building that area. So I think those things are definitely things that I've seen people like if I go on their LinkedIn and there's no like details and like no activity, it's just like I worked here, I worked here.
Yeah.
Um there's like I'm not learning more about you. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think that goes into like writing a thoughtful about me little section. Yeah, putting the bullet points on your each experience with quantifiable results.
Yeah.
In your activity section, it shouldn't just be that like you liked something or you commented something. It should be that you posted something or
Yeah.
in your featured section, featuring work that you've done or your
Yes.
marketing portfolio. And
Yep.
also I love like if you don't work at a company, so you can't post updates at your company, posting on LinkedIn your insight or perspective on a marketing campaign, I think is also, like you mentioned,
Yes.
such a great idea, especially if you want to work in sports marketing. Post about different things in sports marketing and like your take on it and what you think
Exactly.
is interesting.
Yeah, and it just shows effort. And then it also gives you a chance to like say a little bit more than you were able to in the application, right? Like you
Yeah.
can just send a cover letter and a resume, but if you're doing things like that, it shows like another side of you or like, it shows like your thought process. It shows like how you share and like communicate. So I think it's the like taking the extra step to do those things is like so important and it does get noticed from people who are like looking um or hiring. Like I definitely click on like I always click on the LinkedIn just for fun. I'm like I just want to see like what they're like.
That's also really good to hear. And I am gonna cut this clip later and show it to more people because I'm always preaching how important it is to post on LinkedIn, but I feel like so few
Yeah.
people actually take that advice. So I'm really glad to hear the validation that people are looking, and they may not necessarily be the ones to like your post. Like you're probably not looking at that person's LinkedIn profile and liking their LinkedIn post and commenting on their LinkedIn post. So also to say, like, just because you're not getting 100 likes on your post doesn't mean that people aren't seeing it and that it has value.
Yeah. No, totally agree with that.
All right. So is you're posting on LinkedIn, your LinkedIn is full, it's vibrant, and you get noticed by a recruiter who reaches out to you about this opportunity that you think is a scam.
Yeah.
Which I think everyone can relate to, like the LinkedIn scams are abundant. So and you start to go through this hiring process, and you kind of mentioned that you really focused on that you had this previous experience building um a market, like being the first to kind of start a marketing team that you could apply to
Mhm.
this new role. Can you also kind of talk about like you did not have any sports marketing experience, so did you feel like that hindered you in any way? Did you have any strategies in the interview process to kind of talk about that or to combat that, or how did you approach that gap in your experience?
Yeah, I think I was pretty honest. Like, I didn't try to hide the fact that I didn't have sports experience because it was blatantly obvious in my resume. And if, like, I didn't have it. So I think I just, like, didn't lead with that, but I wasn't shy about it or, like, I didn't talk it down. I wasn't like, oh, I don't have sports experience. Because that's already giving myself, like, a check in the wrong way. So I was like, let me just kind of own it in the sense that, I might not have sports knowledge or experience in the way that someone who's worked in sports marketing has before, but like I have digital marketing knowledge and experience and I can apply. Like I love to use like examples of my current work that were directly applicable to what the Red Sox were looking to accomplish. And you'd be surprised, like, there's a lot of crossover amongst industries. Like, at the end of the day, a lot of industries have similar goals. It's just in a different context. So I would just kind of take that and not be shy about it and be like, oh, I think this strategy could work here, or like, this thought process could work here. And not already go into things thinking like, oh, like I'm not going to get this job because I don't have sports knowledge or experience. I will say I do think it matters like what role you're applying for because there are roles in sports that you need to have this background and even in sports marketing. For example, I wasn't signing up or applying for like a sports social role because I like typically they might hire someone who has a little bit more of that background.
Mm.
If you're doing just straight like game coverage. Like, I don't know how you get that experience other than like covering a sports game. Um, so, I work very closely with our social team, and I know that like they definitely take in a broad of a spectrum of people who have that experience at the collegiate level. Like maybe you're covering like like not professional teams, but you have that experience. So I think again, but that calls to like the skill set. So, I just focused on like my skill set and tried to make it applicable to their goals and understanding what their goals were. So I did ask a lot of questions in my interview, that were, I did my research and I was like, okay, like what do other digital marketing people and other baseball teams do. So I tried to look at what they did day to day and then try to understand, okay, like what am I doing now that can be helpful for this role? So I think even little things like that stand out in an interview when it shows that you've put in the effort, you've done your research, and you've gone a little bit of a step past like what they expect of you, which is just to talk about yourself and your skills. I was like, okay, well, I also looked that other people in digital marketing at this team like are doing this. And I think, I might not have that exact experience, but what I'm doing right now really aligns with that. So yeah, that's kind of like how I went through that process. Um, and I also just like I feel like personality wise, like just got along really well with everyone here. So yeah.
Yeah, I like you were drawing the connections from your experience to what they were looking for without them having to ask. I think is
Yes.
my biggest takeaway. And honestly, advice that I've heard similarly like over and over again on the podcast, which is just again, if you're listening, like just sign that it's really good advice to because I think sometimes we just like let the interviewer like we let them lead. Like, oh, I'm just gonna sit back and be passive and answer the questions that they ask me versus taking the initiative of like, this is what I want to be able to say in my interview and what I want to share and what I want them to have as takeaways after talking to me. And I
Yeah.
think if you're a lot more, especially if you're going into industry that you don't have experience in, I think being so much more intentional about that will help you
Mhm.
versus just, yeah, relying on like, I hope they ask me questions about this versus like you
Yeah.
bringing it up.
Yeah, it's like your time too. Like I know it's an interview, but it's an interview both ways, right? So
Yeah.
you're also trying to figure out like, is this a right fit for me? Like, does this make sense? So I think people do themselves a disservice when they ask like when like I've gotten to points in interviews where I'm like, oh, do you have any questions? And they're like, oh no, I think like I got it all. It's like okay, like that kind of shows that I don't know, like there wasn't anything lingering or like you didn't have like any additional thoughts that you just like wanted to like dive deeper into. So I think like if you're prompted to, like one, you should just be asking questions, period. But like especially if you're prompted to, like that's your time to like do
Yeah.
that. And when we hire, I will say like I don't care what industry people come from. Like I don't even look at that. Like because I'm looking for the skill set and I'm looking for things that are transferable and I just want to know this is someone who like can do this job versus like oh they know like everything about baseball. Like that's a plus if we get that, but not like a deal breaker or like a necessity. Like we don't need that. We need someone who like knows and lives and breathes digital marketing, like has new ideas, is like seems very like invested in the space and also wants to like learn and grow. Like those are the kinds of qualities that we look for.
And I think that's really comforting to hear. I hope that, yeah, like you don't need to have all of the sports experience. And I think that applies to any industry of like, you don't need to have all of the experience in that industry. I love how you point out that there may be certain types of roles where you do need the experience. I think the social one's a great example of like certain
Yeah.
types of roles you may need that industry specific experience, but for a lot of roles you don't. And
Yeah.
that shouldn't discourage you from applying just because you don't have the experience.
Yeah. And I mean, we like I would say out of our entire team, like there's like a few people in social. Like there's other people in lots of different roles. So, you might not get the social role, but you could get a different role depending on like what your interests are in. And if you are interested in sports social and don't have that experience, then are there ways that you can try to get that experience that isn't at like the professional sports level that helps you grow? Like if that's where you really see yourself in your future, then you have to kind of understand that like you're not going to get there like immediately, like because you need that experience, you might have to start at like a lower level or like at different ways to try to get there. And not be discouraged about the fact that you can't get that role immediately. Like, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I think that's great advice. And that there basically I think the key takeaway is that there's a path to wherever role that you want. You
yeah,
just have to be willing to work hard for it and be smart about how you're going to approach those opportunities. But I think hearing your story is hopefully really inspiring that there is opportunity and there are ways to break in. You just kind of have to figure out what's going to work best for you.
yeah.
All right, so you get the job at Boston Red Sox, dream job. I want to talk quickly about so kind of the pandemic happened while you were there, which I know changed so many things within marketing, especially for sports. And I know you kind of had mentioned to me that this kind of gave you space to rethink how you engage with fans, leading to some new initiatives. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Sure. So I joined the team like later in the 2019 season. So I was able to like come into the office, like go to a couple games, like kind of see things, and then was like getting ready for the 2020 season. We had already started selling tickets. Like we were ready. And then COVID hit. And at that point, I was still new, very new. I had this plan and I was like, okay, so that's not happening because we were not selling tickets. Like Fenway Park was closed. So like that's a big chunk of my job is supporting ticket sales, and that just disappeared. So I also was like, oh my God, am I gonna have a job anymore? Like, even thinking about that, I was at home and I was like, what do I do with myself? Like, this is crazy. And like, there was so much uncertainty. Like, of course, there weren't answers for if I would have a job, or, we didn't know if the season was gonna happen. Like, it was just kind of like a wait and see until we can figure out like what we're doing. And the 2020 season did happen, but there were no tickets, there were no people here. So once again, I was like, how do I fit into this team? Like, what am I doing? Um, so I really, with my team, our focus was fan engagement. It's like we can't have people at the ballpark, but we can still connect with our fans. We can still like give them stuff to take their mind off the fact that like it seems the world is like falling apart, like bad things might be happening. So Fenway is like a place of escape and happiness. So we wanted to like transfer that in a digital virtual way. So there were things that I was doing that were not in my role like at all. I just kind of raised my hand and I was like, hey, like what if we created this like home fun page where it's like for kids and it's like a bunch of kids initiatives and like things they can print at home and like activities that they can do just to like continue engaging with them. So I ran that for the 2020 season. That is not my job at all. We have someone who's like fan and youth engagement now. But I was leading that. And then another thing that I was doing was these like fan cams where like it was Zooms where we would have like watch parties with
Oh my
groups of
gosh.
people who were like watching the game at home, but they were on Zoom together, so it felt like they were together. And I ran that for our season ticket holders, like sponsors, so people we were still trying to like engage with that are high value people to us. We offered them these opportunities. So that got me a lot of visibility in the organization because I was able to work with these different departments that were really worried about their business and like these people, and I was able to kind of do that for them. Um, and then the other thing that kind of led me to the multicultural marketing addition to my title was I noticed that we had a Spanish social account. It seemed I was like, okay, I see Red Sox in Spanish on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, but I was like, and they have a blue check mark, but I'm like, who's running these? Like, no one on our team is running these because no one on our team speaks Spanish, and I do. So I was like, I started asking questions. I was like, you know, who runs these? And I learned that we Major League Baseball ran all Spanish accounts for every club. Um, I was like, well, wait, like, so someone elsewhere who doesn't
Yeah,
live in
that sounds
Boston,
odd.
who's not a Red Sox fan, is running these accounts. And they did that more from like a manpower standpoint. Like they were trying to support clubs to really enable them to have these accounts, but like maybe they didn't have someone who spoke Spanish on their team. So it was a really great thing that they were doing. But I was like, okay, well, I have time. I speak Spanish. I live in Boston. I work here. I want to run these accounts. I don't know how to run a social media account. Like I can post on Instagram, but so it was a huge learning process. I actually connected with um, my colleague Javi at baseball, who I love, who really taught me everything on how to run these accounts, how to cover a live game. I did not grow up a baseball fan, so I had to learn a lot of these baseball terms and like what was happening on the field. Luckily, I was home to do all of that, and my now husband is like the biggest baseball like nerd, so he was able to like help me understand like what just happened. Um, so I learned a lot about baseball throughout that. And we saw our engagement skyrocket, our followers skyrocketed. We were able to offer these fans in Spanish content that they would never see because this was stuff that we had. Like we had access to our players, we had access to like behind the scenes things. Like there were things that you just had to like be here to be able to offer. And like we did that for our English accounts, but we didn't have that for our Spanish accounts. So it was a really cool thing to be able to kind of develop that. And I did that for 2 full seasons in addition to like my job.
Oh my gosh.
Um, and but it's been incredible. Now we have someone in-house who does it, which is great. So we're seeing growth there, and like our accounts continue to like grow. Our players like love this, especially our Latino players like love the Spanish content. We've collaborated with celebrities like artists. I went to the DR and was able to cover games in the DR, which is like my home country, which is like my mom's like
Oh my
she was born
God.
there. So it's like I feel very lucky to have been able to like do that, but I did put in a lot of work and also like was not afraid of like raising my hand again and being like, hey, I have this skill set that could bring value to us. Like, can I do this? I didn't know if they were going to say yes or no. This was something new. I had never really worked closely with like our players. So that's a whole another thing where you have to work closely with like baseball operations and like our media relations team and player relations team. And, it makes sense. Our social team like has that access, like is able to like work with them. But I'd never worked with these teams before. So it was a lot of like, oh, B like out of nowhere is doing all of these things. But through that, I just saw the deep like connection that Latino fans have with the Red Sox. Like the Red Sox outside of Boston, like in the DR, in Mexico, like it's crazy how big they are. And a lot of it has to do with like a lot of our bigger names are Latino players. Like you have David Ortiz, you have Pedro Martinez. Like, so seeing that, I was also like, okay, we have like this fandom here. What are we doing to engage with them in the ballpark? So then I worked with another team who had we like do these theme nights at Fenway, and they had Pride. They had one for like Irish heritage, which makes sense in Boston. But I was able to like work with them to create a framework because I was like, there's a huge Puerto Rican population, and there's this organization that hosts the Puerto Rico like parade every year. What if we collaborate with them, host a Puerto Rico night at Fenway, have them tell us like what they want to see because we don't know. Like, they're the ones in the community. And we had our first event in 2021 and it was like electric. Like people thought it was going to sell like a couple hundred tickets. It sold over 1,000 tickets.
Oh
Like
my
it was
gosh.
such a crazy energy at the
Wow.
ballpark. Our coach is Puerto Rican, so he was super happy. Some of our players were Puerto Rican, so they engaged with it. And then we kind of have used that framework for other cultures and other backgrounds, partnering with a community partner to like have them take the lead and tell us like what their community wants to see at Fenway. So our first year we had like 6 of these events, including ones that existed. And now we're up to like 27 and we're looking to add a couple more. Um, and it's just
That
been like a huge thing to like bring different people here. Yeah.
That's incredible. And this is all led from you stumbling across an Instagram account and being like,
Yeah.
again, raising your hand. I bet this is also a theme throughout you and your career journey of like, I'm going to pick up some extra work that's not on my job description and
Yeah.
turn it into something absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and like to be honest, like that is like a huge thing where it's like this isn't in my job description and this is extra work that I'm probably not being paid for at the moment, but it's something that I'm super passionate about and I feel like brings value to the organization and I think will help like selfishly will help me grow in my career because now I'm able to lead a lot of these things that, someone who maybe had started at the Red Sox and had only been there for like a year wouldn't be able to do. But it's like I have this skill set, like I had this idea, like, and then having the right colleagues who like kind of build you up and collaborate with you, like has been key. Our team that puts these events together is like top tier. And then also having my marketing team say, hey, yeah, you can run our Spanish accounts. Like, why not? Let's see what happens. I had our designers like translating graphics and like our productions team like creating these videos in Spanish. They have no idea what's being said, but like I'm working with them to like translate things and add captions. Like there was just a lot of like I feel like the energy here is like not like it's very collaborative, very open. So I've been really fortunate in that sense, but I will say like again, you have to like raise your hand if you see like I can add value here, like I can do something here. Like the worst thing that can happen is they say no. And I've been told no like many times, but it's fine. Like that's part of life and you're not going to be able to do everything you want to do. But if it's really well thought out, if you see like you can connect the dots between like the value like for overall organization goals, I think that speaks huge volumes. So I think it's just like not being afraid if you have a really good idea that's really well thought out to share it. And the worst that can happen is people say no, and that's okay. Maybe you adapt and shift it a little, or maybe it just doesn't happen. And I'm still trying to get like us to have a dog day at Fenway because I'm a huge dog lover and I've been told no so many times because there's like all these logistical things, but like I still bring it up every year and like shift how I like pitch it. And I'm like, what if we did this? What if we did that? But yeah,
And also, it also too, like it only just takes one idea for them to say yes to, or like one time you pitch the
exactly.
dog idea for them to say yes to it, right? It just
Yeah.
takes that one time.
I'm just waiting for yes on that one.
Wow, yeah, that's again, I think just very hopefully motivating of what I think because I think you truly created your role for yourself and honestly throughout your whole career that's kind of the theme of like really stepping up and I think that's also how you get to a place where you really love what you do because you're stepping up and picking up the projects that excite you and that kind of helps your own role grow and evolve, which is just really exciting and inspiring to hear.
Mm.
Uh, on this, I know you talked a lot about the multicultural side, which I also think is just so as another really interesting thing to hear because sometimes I think companies don't always initially put funds or money behind that, but that's so cool to see like how it and your initiative almost ended up being like sometimes bigger than other initiatives that the company was putting money towards or grew into something so much bigger than anybody
Yeah.
ever thought. And so that's also really, really exciting, I think, to see and to see more multicultural marketing roles start to pop up and start to see companies really prioritize those because they do good and they also can absolutely be revenue driving,
Yes.
which is kind of what you were able to prove there as well.
Yeah, and I think that's like the key, like understanding your audience, like who you're talking to, and like when you're in the room with certain people, like when I'm in the room with our DE&I director, like the conversation is very different than when I'm in the room with like our ticketing, our group sales team, and we're talking about how to get more groups to come to these events. And it's not because like all they care about is the money. It's just like that's their goals. Like their goals are different. So, the different conversations that you have really matter, and the way you kind of present things and are able to like shape things to make sense to the people that you're talking about them with is super important. So like I knew it was and you are gonna get like frustrated if it's something you really care about. Like these events and like the work that I was doing on Spanish social, like I cared so much about it. It was crazy. Like I would come home fired up if like I got like something that I was like, oh, I didn't agree with that. Or like if it was a win, like it's such emotional work and like personal that, sometimes you have to like take a step back. But like I think I really had to think about, okay, like I care about this personally, but the person I'm talking to might not care about it as much as I do, and that's okay. But like, how do I get them to see the value? And sometimes it is, again, using my digital marketing skills and like my understanding like different audiences and working with our analytics team to prove that we have this community here. They live here. Like, how do we engage them? Or even just general industry like trends where it shows that like Latino buyers are like younger and like we want to go after younger people. Like it makes sense. So just things like that have definitely helped. And then sometimes it's just doing the work and then showing like, hey, look at this growth here. Like this is massive. So it's a process, and I definitely there were times where I was like, I'm over this, like I can't do this anymore. Um, but I didn't get discouraged because I cared so much about it. Like it was so personal to me, that I just had to like push through sometimes, to and like I said, it's not all wins. There's still things that I'm working through, and things that, I have to get approved, and like that people don't really understand. But you just have to like keep going, and know that some things will get through and you'll be able to accomplish those, and others might not. Um, but you can't like take it personally, even if it is like personal work. Like that's just like how business is. Some ideas, campaigns get greenlit and some don't. And that's just how it is. You can't do everything.
Yeah, but I think that's really good advice to remember because especially if you are taking the piece of advice of like putting yourself out there and stepping up for things and wanting to do initiatives, you also have to remember that not everything's going to be accepted. And like you said, it's not personal.
It's
And
not, yeah.
once you get really good at not taking those things personal, then you stop getting discouraged by the losses and you get even more motivated by the wins.
Yeah, exactly. Couldn't have
Yeah.
said it better.
Well, this has been such a, I feel like I can honestly just keep asking you questions for a whole nother hour. But I think it's time for us to wrap up here. Do you have any last advice you want to share with women in marketing?
I would just say like something that has been a theme in like what I've talked about is just knowing what your strengths are and like what are things that you bring to the table that someone else might not, and like really building upon those and not being shy about it. There's a really good way to do it where you don't come off like, too like, oh, I'm better than everyone at this. It's just like showing your strengths. And then in work, like the best thing that I've been able to do is finding opportunities, like finding gaps, finding areas where I'm like, oh, I can be an asset here. Like you have to think of yourself as an asset. So find ways that you can fit into different spaces and like really help those spaces and not be shy to like raise your hand and do things that might not be in your wheelhouse, but you might have a really big interest in, I don't know, a specific topic that you don't work with every day, but you know a lot about it because like it's an interest. And so offering help in that way, or, not being so like rigid and like I'm just like in this position. If your team needs help in something else, like being able to kind of lend a hand there. Um, so I would just say like finding areas where there are missed opportunities and connecting the dots and being able to like raise your hand if that's applicable and a good fit for you. And then just like being super flexible and adaptable and knowing that, like things might not work out the way you want them to at the moment, but that doesn't mean you can't get there. Um, like, yeah, just taking losses as like an opportunity to turn them into wins is like what I would say.
I think that's an incredible takeaway. And again, this conversation was so much fun. I feel inspired and energized, and hope everyone listening feels the same. Thank you so much for coming on Marketing Girly. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Beatrice.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was super fun.